The will ran to 2 pages, and Etta Holm was still standing inside the door with her gloves on when she heard her own name read out of the middle of the second one. She had come up to the house because Oren Sparrow had asked for a cup of water, and there was nobody else in the yard to get it. That was the whole of her business in that room, as she understood it. She set the cup down at Sparrow's elbow, stepped back to the door, and stood there in her coat with her gloves still on, because she expected to be told inside the hour to go and pack a trunk. And when a thing like that is coming, you want to be nearest the door, the same way you want to be nearest the gate in a corral with a horse you do not know yet. It was the 6th of March, 1890, in the front room of the Broke Ring on Smith Creek, in Ruby Valley, Elko County, Nevada, with the Ruby Mountains standing up white behind the house and the ground outside, going soft in the middle of the day, and hard again by 4 in the afternoon. There were 4 men sitting down, and 1 woman standing up. Oren Sparrow, 61 years old, of Elko, who had drawn wills in that county since 1873 and read them aloud in a flat, courteous voice that gave nothing away. Alman Poe, 55, the appraiser the court had appointed, with a leather folder on his knees and a pencil behind his ear. Loyal Steen, 46, who ran cattle in Franklin Basin on the other side of the valley, and who had signed his name as a witness in that same room twice in 2 years, and had opinions about both occasions. And Thaddeus Merrick, 34, who had ridden 60 miles down from Independence Valley in a good coat, and had been in the house for 20 minutes, and had not sat back in his chair once. Sparrow read the first page the way you read a fence line, post by post, and there was nothing in it anybody could argue with. The deeded ground, 4,800 acres running from the creek out onto the flat. The buildings, being a 4-room log house, a bunkhouse, a shop, 2 barns, a shearing shed nobody had used since 1884, and 9 miles of drift fence. The stock, being 311 head of horses more or less, the exact number to be ascertained, and 74 head of cattle, and 6 work mules. The note at the Stockman's Bank of Elko, $4,200, given in 1887 against the deeded ground, falling due the 1st of November, 1890. Then Sparrow turned the page and read the part that mattered, and Etta Holm, standing at the door with her gloves on, heard the words Marietta Holm in a lawyer's mouth for the first time in her life. He gave it to the both of them, the whole of it, undivided, share and share alike, to Marietta Holm of Smith Creek and to Thaddeus Merrick of Independence Valley, as tenants in common, neither half separated from the other, neither half hers alone nor his alone, but the 2 of them holding 1 ranch between them the way 2 hands hold 1 rope. And then the clause. Neither of them could sell, mortgage, convey, partition, or divide their half, nor lease it, nor promise it, until the estate's note of $4,200 was discharged in full. When that note was discharged, the first election belonged to whichever of the 2 of them had discharged it. That one might, within 10 days, name a single price for a half interest in the whole. And the other must then, within 10 days more, either buy at that price or sell at it. One names, the other chooses. And if neither completed inside the 10 days, the clause was spent, and the will had nothing further to say. There was 1 more line under that, and Sparrow read it in exactly the same voice as the rest. The branding iron in the house, being the ring iron with the piece out of it, was to stay in the house until somebody had a use for it. Then he put the pages down on the table and squared them with 2 fingers and drank the water Etta had brought him, and for about 9 seconds nobody in the room said anything at all. Etta Holm did not move. She had a strange, high, ringing feeling behind her eyes, the way you feel when a horse steps on your foot, and you know it is going to hurt, but it has not started yet. She had come into that room expecting to be turned off a place where she had worked for 9 years, and she had spent 3 nights lying awake, deciding not to argue about it, and now she was holding half of it. And the first clear thought she had was not joy, and was not even surprise. It was this: I have $211 in a tin under the floor of the tack room and half of a $4,200 note, and I do not know how to be the kind of person who owns something. The second clear thought was better, and she was ashamed of it for about a year afterward. It was, now they will have to say my name. Thaddeus Merrick said, "Read the second page again." Sparrow read the second page again. Merrick sat and looked at the table. He was a well-made man, 34, black-haired, with a nose that had been broken by a wheel horse when he was 20, and set by a man who was in a hurry. And he had the particular stillness of somebody adding a column of figures behind his face. He had come down expecting to bury an uncle and inherit a ranch, and had been raised on the certainty of it since he was 11. Zeb Ansley had no wife and no living kin but a sister's household in California, and 4,800 acres of Ruby Valley had hung in the back of his head for 23 years, like a coat on a hook, waiting for the weather to turn. He said, without looking up, "Who is Marietta Holm?" And that was the first thing he ever said about her, and he said it to a lawyer, in her hearing. With her standing 8 feet away in the doorway of a house she had cooked in and cleaned in and been ill in, and it is worth being exact about what was in it, because it was not contempt. That is the whole trouble with Thaddeus Merrick, and it takes the better part of a year to get to the bottom of it. There was no contempt in it. He genuinely did not know. Nobody had ever written it in a letter to him. His uncle's letters, 3 or 4 a year for 12 years, had said the grass was short, or the grass was long, and had said the horsework was going along, and had never once said that the horsework was going along, because a woman named Holm had been doing it since she was 19. Loyal Steen answered, before Sparrow could. Steen said, in the pleasant, helpful voice of a man laying a hand on your shoulder, "That's Zeb's horse hand there in the door." Etta had been called that for 9 years, and had never before heard it used to explain her to somebody who owned half of what she owned. Sparrow, who was 61, and had watched a great many rooms go over the edge, closed his folder and said the useful thing. He said the will was in order. Executed the 24th of January, 1890, witnessed by Loyal Steen and by Bessie Aguirre, and that Zebulon Ansley had been of perfectly sound mind on that date, and had spent 40 minutes in Sparrow's office in Elko making sure of every line of it, and that if anybody in the room intended to contest it, they should say so to him directly and not to each other. And that in the meantime nothing whatever could be sold, split, borrowed against, or handed off until the 1st of November, and that this was not an accident of drafting. It was the point of the document. The old man had spent an hour on that clause alone. He tied it up, Merrick said. He tied you together, Sparrow said. Nobody had a word for that, so they all stood up. Outside, the yard was in that half-thawed condition Ruby Valley gets in early March, mud on top and iron underneath, and a wind coming off the rubies that had snow in it somewhere behind. Alman Poe went off to look at the barns with his folder. Loyal Steen stood by his horse a while, arranging his face. Sparrow got into a rented buggy for the 45-mile pull back to Elko. And Thaddeus Merrick stood at the gate of the near corral with his hat in his hand and looked at 22 head of saddle horses standing in the mud on 3 legs apiece, with their eyes half shut in the sun, and he did not know that he was looking at the only thing on that ranch worth more than the paper it was written on, or that he had been introduced to it 20 minutes ago and had not caught the name. Etta Holm walked past all of them and went back down to the corrals and got on with the afternoon, because there were 2 mares due to foal, and a gate hinge that had been wrong since January, and a young horse in the round pen that had had 6 days of her and was 4 days from being worth anything. That is not stoicism. It is what you do when the ground has gone out from under you and you have not decided yet which way to fall. You go and do the next 40 minutes of work, exactly and slowly, and you let the rest of it catch up to you at its own speed. It caught up to her at about 8 that evening, sitting on the edge of her bed in the little room off the kitchen, with her boots in her hand. She had been sent for once in her life, and it had been to bring a cup of water, and she had come out of it owning 2,400 acres, and half of 311 horses, and half of a note she could not have paid a tenth of. She put her boots down and got the tin out from under the floor of the tack room in the dark and counted the money in it by feel, which was a thing she did about twice a year, and it came to $211.40, the same as it had come to at Christmas. Then she put it back and went to bed, and lay there listening to a stud horse call twice from the far side of the creek, and thought about the iron in the house, the ring with the piece out of it, hanging on its nail in the kitchen, where it had hung for 19 years, and which Zeb Ansley had never once explained to her, and which she had never once asked about, because in that country you do not ask a man about a thing he has hung on a wall and stop talking about. You should know what she was, because the whole of what follows turns on other people not knowing it. Marietta Holm was 28 years old in March of 1890. Her father had come out of Denmark by way of Chicago and had shod horses for the Central Pacific at Halleck Station for 14 years, a short, wide man with forearms like fence posts and 40 English words. And her mother had taught a subscription school in Elko for one winter before she married him, and had brought 11 books into the marriage, and taught Etta to read out of all 11. Her father was buried at Halleck in 1878. Her mother went back to Illinois in 1881 and never got west again, and wrote every month and then at Christmas, and Etta answered every letter within a week for 9 years, which tells you as much about her as anything in this story. She went to work at the Broke Ring in the spring of 1881, 19 years old, hired to cook at $18 a month. She lasted 6 weeks as a cook. What happened was that Zeb Ansley, who was 65 then, and had 2 hands and 190 head of range horses, scattered over about 200 square miles of sagebrush and rimrock, came in one evening and found the cook standing in the round pen in the last of the light, with a 4-year-old bay following her around loose with his nose about a foot off her shoulder, doing it because he wanted to. Zeb watched that over the top rail for the better part of 10 minutes without saying anything. Then he went in and ate a bad supper. And the next morning he told her she was the worst cook in Elko County, and that he would give her $22 a month to quit the kitchen and start riding. That is the entire romance of it, and it is not much of a story, and she told it about 6 times in 9 years, and always in the same 40 words. What she had was not magic, and she was extremely tired of being told it was. She had partly got it from her father, who had picked up somewhere north of 40,000 feet in his working life, and had never once had to tie a horse up to do it, and partly worked it out herself in the round pen over 9 years, with nobody watching. In that country in those years, most young horses got made in about 4 days by 3 men and a snubbing post. And what came out the far end would carry a rider in a condition of permanent private objection. Etta's took 5 or 6 weeks. She stood in the middle and made the wrong answer slightly tiresome and the right answer completely easy. And when a horse answered, she quit and went and did something else, which is the hardest part, and the part nobody copies. What came out the far end would stand tied all day, load in the dark cross water, let you get off on either side, and go on doing it in the 7th year and the 12th. It was worth exactly this much. A range horse off the Ruby Flats was worth $9 at a sale in Elko, and a broke saddle horse out of Etta Holm's pen was worth $65. And the difference between those 2 numbers was 60 days of her time and nothing else in the world. The second thing she had was the water. This is the part that ends up mattering, so hold on to it. You do not gather horses on the Great Basin the way you gather cattle. Cattle can be pushed. Range horses cannot be pushed anywhere they have not already decided to go. They will run 14 miles in a circle and come back to the same rimrock, and they will do it all day, and you will ruin 4 saddle horses proving it. What horses do is drink. In a country that runs 60 miles between one drink and the next, every band on that desert has an order it uses. This seep in April when the snow water is still standing. That spring in July when the seep is gone. The willow hole in September. The creek in a hard year. It does not change much, and it does not change fast, and the only way on earth to know it is to have watched the same ground for years and written down what you saw. Etta had written it down. She had a tally book, 3 of them by 1890, in a flour sack in her war bag, every horse on the place by color, brand, markings, age, and where he was foaled, and behind that, 9 years of dates and water. Sulphur, the 11th of April, 40 head. Coyote Spring, the 3rd of July, the gray stud bunch, 22. The Seep at Overland, the 19th of September, dry, all of them gone north to the Willows. Nobody had ever asked to see it. Zeb knew it existed. He had bought her the 3rd book himself in Elko in 1888 and had said, handing it over, that a man who writes a thing down is only half as much of a fool as a man who remembers it, and that was as close as Zebulon Ansley ever came in his life to telling somebody they had done well. Zeb Ansley. 74, from Ohio by way of the Comstock, in Ruby Valley since 1866. A dry, closed, courteous, entirely unsentimental old man, who wore a collar to town and swore in 2 languages at home, who had not been sick a day since 1871, and then was sick from the middle of December to the 22nd of February, and was buried on the 24th, 2 days after the ground would take a shovel. He had never married. He had 11 books, the same 11 books, because they were the ones Etta's mother had left behind in the house at Halleck, and he had bought them at the sale for $2. He had never told Etta that. She found out in July, and he had a branding iron with a piece out of it hanging on a nail in the kitchen, which had been the broke ring iron for 19 years, and which every buckaroo between Elko and Eureka could read at 200 yards, and about which he had said, in Etta's hearing, exactly 1 sentence in 9 years. It was a ring. Once. Now, the valley. There were 22 outfits of any size in Ruby Valley and Franklin Basin in 1890, and every one of them heard about the will inside 6 days. And the thing you have to understand is that not one person was outraged. Outrage would have been easier to live with. What the valley felt was a warm, comfortable, entirely sincere concern for Etta Holm. Poor thing. Half a ranch and a $4,200 note. What is a woman going to do with half a ranch? She'll sell to Merrick by haying and be glad of it. It was said kindly in kitchens, by people who liked her, and it was said so often and so early that by the middle of April it had stopped being a prediction and had turned into a fact everybody was simply waiting on, the way you wait on a calf that has already been sold. Loyal Steen came over on the 11th of March with a hindquarter of beef in the wagon, which was a decent thing to do, and asked her to marry him in the yard before he had the tailgate down. He was 46, a widower, 1,900 acres and 700 cattle, a heavy, kind, slow-moving man with a good name, and he had asked her once before, in 1887, and been turned down without hard feeling. He put it plainly, standing in the mud. She had half a ranch she could not run, and could not sell, and could not borrow on. He had a place 6 miles across the valley with a stove that drew. Put the 2 together and let Merrick have his half, and there was no hardship anywhere in it for anybody. Etta thanked him and said no, and he took it well, and he stayed for coffee. And on the way out, he said the sentence that she thought about at 2 in the morning for the next 8 months. He said, "Etta, there's no shame in being carried aways." She said there wasn't. And there isn't. That is what makes it the hardest sentence in this story to answer. Then there was Merrick, 60 miles north in Independence Valley, and you may as well know his half of it now, because he would not have told you, and did not tell her until August. Thaddeus Merrick had 3,100 head of cattle, 2 sections deeded, and the use of a great deal more, 9 men on the payroll, and a standing credit at the Stockman's Bank that Oren Sparrow could have described to you to the dollar. He had built exactly none of it. His father had run 40 freight teams out of Sacramento in the 1860s, and had bought his one living heir a ranch at 26, the way another man buys a watch, and had come up twice a year since to look at it and say what he thought. Thad was a real horseman, that has to be said, and it matters later. He could ride anything with hair on it, he had a genuinely good eye for a horse's legs, and he worked, in the sense that he was out at 5 and in at 8, and had the calluses to prove it. What he had never once had, at 34 years of age, was the experience of being the reason a thing existed. Every man on his payroll knew where the money came from. Every man in Independence Valley knew. He had spent 8 years being very slightly and very politely not believed, and he had built the whole of his character out of exactness as an answer to it. He counted things. He wrote everything down. He paid on the day. He never once guessed out loud. And he had come down to Ruby Valley in March, expecting the one clean thing in his life. A ranch that had come to him because a hard old man had judged him worth it, and had got instead a half interest, tied for 8 months, shared with a woman he had never heard of, who had come to the reading of the will to bring the lawyer a cup of water. He did not resent her. It is important, and it is rarer than it sounds. What he did was worse, and it took him until autumn to see it. He pitied her, and he made a plan. He came back on the 15th of March, 9 days after the reading, and he came in the middle of the afternoon on a good sorrel horse with a led pack horse behind him, which meant he intended to stay a night or 2, and he had a bank draft folded flat in the inside pocket of his coat for $3,000. He had worked at it. That is the thing about Thaddeus Merrick that makes him worth telling you about at all. He had sat down at his own table in Independence Valley with a pencil and worked the whole matter out to a number, and had come back down to Ruby Valley with a plan that was, by every measure he had ever been taught, extremely generous. The appraiser had the horses at $9 a head and the ground at $2 an acre, so half the outfit, clear of the note, came out at about $2,400 on paper. He was offering $3,000. And on top of the $3,000 that she stay on at the brokering as forewoman of the horse and at $60 a month, which was $20 more than Zeb had ever paid her, and the little room off the kitchen for as long as she wanted it, and a free hand with the young horses. He rehearsed it on the ride down. He had never in his life offered anybody anything so far above what he had to. She was in the round pen when he came into the yard, working a brown 4-year-old on a 22-foot line, and she finished what she was doing before she looked up, which took about 3 minutes, and he stood at the rail and watched. And the watching is the first crack in him, although he would not have said so. The horse was doing nothing spectacular. He was walking a circle and stopping when her hands came down and turning in to face her and walking again, and there was no rope on his head at all by the end of it, and the whole thing had the boredom of something being done properly. They talked in the kitchen because it was cold. She put coffee on. He took the draft out and put it on the table between them and turned it around so it faced her, which is a gesture he had seen his father use, and he said his piece. She let him get all the way to the end of it. She was good at that. She had been in rooms with men for 9 years. Then she said, "You can't buy it." He said he understood she might want time. "No," she said. "I mean, you cannot buy it, nor can I sell it, nor can either of us mortgage it, lease it, or promise it to anybody until that note at the bank is paid. It's in the will. It's the 4th line on the 2nd page. Thaddeus Merrick, who counted things and wrote everything down and had never once guessed out loud. had heard that clause read to him twice on the 6th of March, and had understood it, in the way you understand a thing while you are still full of another thing, as a delay. A month maybe, some legal business Sparrow would get around. He said, until November. The 1st of November, she said. And then whichever of us paid it gets to name the price, and the other one buys or sells at it. There was a considerable silence in that kitchen. He is not slow. Give him that. He got all the way to the bottom of it in about 20 seconds, sitting there with a cup he had not touched, and what he got to was this: that a will he had thought was a piece of clumsy old man's sentiment was in fact a machine with 3 moving parts, and that he was in it, and that the woman across the table had been in it since the 6th of March and had not said so to a single living soul for 9 days. So he did the decent thing, and it was the worst thing he did all year. He said, then let me pay the note. All of it, today, out of my own pocket. It's $4,200 and I have it. That clears the estate and unties the whole business by Easter, and neither of us has to sit here until November. And Etta Holm put her cup down and said no, and then, because he deserved it, she told him exactly why, in the flattest voice she owned, and it is the moment the story turns from a will into a contest. If you pay it, she said, you have discharged the note. The will gives the first election to whichever of us discharges the note. So, on the day you hand the bank $4,200, you get to name one price for a half interest, and I have 10 days to buy at it or sell at it. I have $211. So, I sell, at whatever figure you write on the paper. And you will write a fair one, I know that, and you will hand me $3,000 or $3,500, and I will thank you. And I will be off this place by the end of the month with more money than I have ever had, and everyone in this valley will say Merrick did well by Zeb's horse hand. And they'll be right. That is exactly what will have happened. She turned the draft around on the table so it faced him again. You're not offering to help me, she said. You're offering to buy the year. He sat there for a long moment, and then Thaddeus Merrick laughed. Out loud once, a short surprised bark of a laugh, and put his hand over his face, and that laugh is the single most important sound in this story, because a great many men in Elko County in 1890 would have got up from that table with a red neck and been an enemy for the rest of their lives, and he did not. And he could not have told you why. He had been outplayed at a kitchen table by a woman in a work dress and a canvas apron who had read a document more carefully than he had. And some part of him that had been asleep since he was 26 sat up and took an interest. How long have you known that? He said. Since the 6th of March. About 4 seconds after Mr. Sparrow read it. You could have let me pay it. Yes, she said. Why didn't you? And she said, because I don't want $3,000. I want to see what a whole one is worth. And that is the first true thing either of them said to the other. He stayed 2 nights. He slept in the bunkhouse, which surprised the two hands considerably, and on the 17th he went home to Independence Valley, with the draft still folded in his coat, and when men asked him how he had got on with the Ruby Valley business, he said it was tied up until November, which was true, and let them think what they liked. But he had not changed his mind. That is the thing to hold on to through the whole middle of this story. Riding north on the 17th of March, he was not thinking that he had been wrong about her. He was thinking that she was better than he expected, and that this was going to be sadder than he expected, because come the 2nd of November, she would still have $211, and he would still have a bank, and the pity he had ridden down with had merely got some respect mixed into it, which does not change pity at all. It only makes it heavier to carry. Almond Poe came out to count on the 8th of April with a pencil, a folder, and 3 days. The court wanted an inventory, and so did the bank. The will said 311 head of horses more or less, the exact number to be ascertained, and it is a strange thing to modern ears, but in 1890 in the Great Basin, a horse outfit genuinely did not know what it owned within 100 head, because the animals were 3 miles or 30 miles out on the desert in bands of 9 and 14 and 40, and would be gathered twice in their lives, and gathered wrong both times. Poe rode 3 days with loyal steersman for a guide. He saw 106 head. He looked at 200 square miles of gray sage and black rimrock with the wind coming across it, and did the sum every appraiser in that county did that spring, after the winter they had all just come through, and wrote 180 in his folder and drew a line under it. Etta was in the yard when he told her. 180, he said. I'll say 180 and the court will take it. Anything past that walked off in the winter, and you'd be a long time proving different. There are 311, she said. Poe was not unkind. He was a working appraiser with 40 miles to ride. He said what everybody in the valley had been saying for a month, only with a pencil in his hand, that the old man's figure was an old man's figure, that a number written in a book was not a horse, and that if she could show him 311 head standing in a corral, he would write 311 and be pleased to. When? She said. He said the inventory had to be filed with the court by the 1st of July. And Thaddeus Merrick, who had ridden down for the counting and was standing at the near corral with his hat in his hand, said the sentence he spent the rest of the year paying for. He said, put 180. Alman will amend it if she finds them. She had 84 days. Here is what everybody in Ruby Valley expected her to do, because it is what every horse outfit in the Great Basin had done since the 1860s. Hire 8 riders. Ride the country in a line for 3 weeks. Push everything you find at a wing fence and a trap corral, and take what you get, which is roughly 6 head in 10, and come in with tired men and a number you know is short. She hired 2 riders and a cook, and she went out and sat on water. Basilio Aguirre was 24, born at Halleck, and had been at the Broke Ring 4 years, and could hold a spring in a wind all day without moving. Tobe Dill was 19, and could not at the start and learned. The cook was Bessie Aguirre, who was Basilio's aunt, and who had witnessed the will in January, and who never in her life volunteered a word about it. Wages came to $118 for the whole of it. Etta paid them out of the $211 in the tin, and never told a person on that place where the money came from. The method was this, and it is the reason she owned half a ranch by November. There are 6 waters on the Broke Ring Range that matter, and 11 that do not, and which is which depends entirely on the date. In the second half of April, the snow water is still standing in the sinks on the flat, so there is water everywhere and no horse has to come anywhere. So you do not gather in April. You ride, and you count, and you write it down, and you wait. By the 10th of May the flat sinks are gone, and the bands have dropped back to Sulphur and the Willow and the Seep at Overland. By the 1st of June there are 4. By the middle of June, in a dry year, there are 2, and every horse on 200 square miles of that desert has to put his nose in one of them inside 36 hours or leave the country entirely. You do not chase anything. You simply arrange to be at the water, quietly, downwind, with a wing of cut juniper and 300 feet of rope, on the afternoon they have to come. They took the first 40 head at Sulphur on the 14th of May, and it took 11 minutes. They took 62 at the Willow on the 19th. They took a band of 31 out of Coyote Spring on the 26th by doing nothing whatever for 5 hours and then closing a gate. They got 94 head off the north end in the first week of June in 3 separate sittings, and by the 8th of June the number in the home field was 297. And Etta Holm rode in at dusk and washed her face, and went and sat on the top rail and looked at them for an hour, and did not say anything to anybody. Because 297 is not 311. The last 14 were with the gray stud she called Handbill, 14 years old, foaled on that range never handled, who had never in his life brought a band to a water anybody was sitting on, and had no intention of starting. Handbill drank at a rock tank up under the east face of the Rubies that held about 400 gallons and filled from a snow seam, and he could stay up there until the snow seam quit, which in a normal year was the 10th of July, which was 9 days past when the inventory had to be filed. So on the 21st of June, Etta and Basilio rode up there with 2 pack horses and 40 sacks, and over 2 days. They took the rock tank apart, not filled it in, took the lip off it so that the water it held ran out over the shelf and down the slope and was gone in an afternoon, and what had been a tank was a wet stain. They came into the Willow on the 24th of June at about 4 in the afternoon, all 14 of them, with the gray horse in the rear pushing his mares. And they came at a walk with their heads down because the last 6 miles of it is uphill, and Tobe Dill closed the gate. 311. Alman Poe drove out on the 27th of June and counted them himself in the big corral, twice with his pencil, and wrote 311 in his folder and drew a line under that, and said to Etta, in the tone of a man conceding a hand of cards, that he had been appraising in that county for 14 years and had never once had a woman tell him a number and then produce it. Thaddeus Merrick was at the fence for the second count. He had come down on the 24th, having heard something in Elko, and he had been standing at the corral when the last 14 came in behind the gray horse, and he had watched Etta Holm sit on a horse 200 yards off and do absolutely nothing at all, while the last 14 head on the place walked themselves into a corral, and then get down and walk over and take the wire off the gate herself because Tobe had put it on wrong. He asked her that evening how she had done it, and she told him, plainly, in about 4 minutes, the whole thing, the waters and the dates and the book and the rock tank, and she did not make it sound clever, because to her it was not clever, it was 9 years of writing down what she saw. He said, "Why didn't you tell Poe in April?" She said, "I did." That is all she said. She did not say, "And you told him to put 180. She did not have to, and the fact that she did not say it is what kept him awake that night in the bunkhouse. Because a woman who does not use the sentence she has earned is a woman who has decided you are not worth the trouble of. And there is no man alive who can bear being decided about. The summer is where they fell in love, and neither of them noticed it happening, which is the only way it ever actually happens. He came down every 10 days or so through June and July, and stayed 3 nights, and it took him until the end of July to admit that he was arranging his own work around it. They rode fence. They shod horses. They argued about whether the shearing shed was worth roofing. He was extremely good company between 5 in the morning and 8 at night, and no company at all in the evenings, when he sat with his hat on his knee and his back straight, like a man waiting for an appointment. She broke that by handing him a book. There were 11 books on a shelf in the front room of the Broke Ring, and on the 4th of July. In the evening, with the hands gone to the dance at Lemoy, and the 2 of them left with a supper neither of them wanted, Etta got one down and put it in his hands and told him to read out loud because she had been fixing a hackamore all evening and her eyes were tired. He was a terrible reader. He read like a man giving evidence. She laughed at him, and he stopped, offended, and then read worse on purpose, and that was the evening. He asked, at the end of it, where the books had come from, and she said her mother had brought them out from Illinois, and had left them at Halleck in 1881 when she went east, and that she had no idea what became of them. And Thad Merrick, who had been through the house papers in April looking for the note, said, "They're in the estate book." He bought them at a sale at Halleck. $2 for the lot, June of 1881. That is how Etta Holm found out, 9 years late, in a hot front room on the 4th of July, that the reason there were 11 books on that shelf was that a 65-year-old man, with no wife and no talent whatever for saying anything, had gone to a sale 40 miles away and bought a departing widow's 11 books so that the 19-year-old he had just moved out of his kitchen would have something to read. She went outside and stood in the yard for about 20 minutes. He had the sense to stay where he was. The dance at Lamoille was the 12th of July, and they both went, and it is the only time in the whole year that anybody says the quiet part out loud. Merrick was introduced to the room. That is the actual phrase people used. Someone walked him along the wall of the hall and said his name and where he ran cattle and whose nephew he was, 11 or 12 times. Etta came in the same wagon, in a gray wool dress with the elbow patched in a slightly wrong shade out of a sleeve lining in 1888, and stood at the end of the hall, and 3 women she had known for 9 years were warm to her and asked how she was managing, and a 4th, who meant no harm on earth, asked her to go and see whether there was more coffee. She went and got the coffee. Of course she did. And Merrick, 30 feet away with his hand out being introduced to a cattle buyer, watched her carry a pot the length of the hall in front of 90 people and felt something extremely uncomfortable that he could not name, and named it wrongly. He named it pity. He decided, riding home in the wagon at 2 in the morning, with her asleep against the tarpaulin, that he was going to be very generous indeed in November. Loyal Steen told her on the 26th of July, at the stock sale in Elko, standing on the boards outside the pens with 8 or 9 men within hearing, and he did it kindly, and he did it because he thought she already knew. He said, "It was a hard thing he did to you at the end there, Etta. I've thought so since January." She said she didn't follow him. And Steen, who had signed his name as a witness in that front room twice in 2 years, looked at her and understood in about a second and a half that she did not know, and then went ahead and told her anyway, in front of 9 men, because there is no stopping a sentence once it is a third of the way out. Why, he said. He had you down for the whole of it. In 88, whole outfit, ground, horses, the lot, to Marietta Holm and nobody else. I signed it in that same room in May of 1888, and Bessie signed it after me, and then in January he tore it up and put the nephew in for half. There is a particular kind of silence that 9 men make on a sale yard boardwalk when they are all pretending to look at cattle. Etta Holm said thank you, and walked the 3 blocks to Orange Sparrow's office, and asked to see the file, and Sparrow, who had been waiting since March for this, and had hoped it would come from him, got it out and put it in front of her, and left the room for 20 minutes. It was 1 page. The will of the 9th of May, 1888, everything he had, of every kind and description, to Marietta Holm of Smith Creek. Absolutely, and without condition. Witnessed by Loyal Steen and by Bessie Aguirre. And across the face of it, in a clerk's hand, the word revoked, and the date, the 24th of January, 1890. She sat in a lawyer's office in Elko on a hot Saturday and looked at 1 page of paper that said she had owned the whole thing for 20 months and had never been told, and had then stopped owning it 5 weeks before the old man was buried. When Sparrow came back, she asked him 1 question. She asked him why. And Sparrow, who was 61 and had drawn wills in that county since 1873 and had privately thought about this one every week since January, sat down and told her, because she had asked, and because he judged she could hold it. Zebulon Ansley had come into that office on the 24th of January, 1890, having got himself the 45 miles from Smith Creek in a hired buggy in the cold, sat down, and said he wanted it changed. Sparrow had argued with him for the better part of an hour, which was more argument than he had ever offered a client in 17 years, and had lost. And what Ansley had said, more than once, was this: A woman alone in this county with 4,800 acres, and no man in the picture does not keep it. She gets married out of it, or she gets sued out of it over a fence, or she gets bought out of it by somebody at 40 cents on the dollar in a bad year. And she is grateful at the time, and it is done inside 2 years. I have watched it done. I will not leave her a thing that will be taken off her before she has had a chance to be seen holding it. So I will leave her half, and I will tie the other half to a man who cannot be bought off and cannot walk away, and I will put a year on it, and at the end of the year she will either have been seen or she will not, and that is the most I can do for her from where I am going." "He thought he was building you a fence," Sparrow said. "He was," said Etta. "That's what a fence is for. It's for something that would wander off and get into trouble." She rode home 45 miles and did not sleep, and for the next 11 days she was the most exactly polite person in the state of Nevada. She said good morning. She said pass the salt. She rode out at 5 and came in at 8 and did the work of 2 people, and when Thad Merrick came down on the 30th of July, she told him what was in the file in about 60 words, flat, at the corral gate, and then went and got on a horse. He took it worse than she did, and it took her a while to understand why. Because look at it from where he was standing. He had spent 5 months believing that a hard-closed old man he had wanted to please since he was 11 years old had judged him and found him worth half of 4,800 acres. And what he found out at a corral gate on the 30th of July was that his uncle had not been thinking about him at all. He had been hunting for a fence post. He had needed one man in the state of Nevada with enough money that he could not be bought and enough family shame that he could not walk away. And he had reached into California and found a nephew with a ranch his father had paid for and had driven him into the ground next to her. "He didn't leave it to us," Thad said, out loud to nobody, at 11 o'clock that night in the bunkhouse doorway. "He left me to her." On the 2nd of August, Etta Holm rode to Halleck to see a woman she had met perhaps 20 times in her life. Delphia Bray was 63 and had cooked at the hotel at Halleck Station since 1874. 3 meals a day for the Central Pacific and everybody who got off it, and she was the widow of Wilkin Bray, and Wilkin Bray was the other half of the ring. That is the whole of the iron on the kitchen wall, and here it is. In 1866, 2 men came into Ruby Valley from the Comstock with 40 head between them and took up Smith Creek together, share and share alike, no paper anywhere. And they ran a closed ring for a brand, because a ring is a thing with no beginning and no end, and both of them thought that was a fine notion at 30 years of age. Wilkin Bray was buried in the spring of 1871. And Zeb Ansley took the ring iron down to the shop and put it in the fire and cut a piece out of the top of it with a chisel and ran it that way for 19 years and called the place the Broke Ring and never once said why to a living soul. Delphia Bray gave her coffee in the hotel kitchen at Halleck between the 11 o'clock and the 1 o'clock and told her the rest of it without any particular feeling, the way you tell a thing you have finished being angry about. She had inherited Wilkin's half and held it for 3 years. She had been 44, alone, with half a horse outfit and no cash, and there had been a fence case, and a man in Elko who was very helpful about the fence case, and a bad winter. And by the autumn of 1874, she had signed her half over to Zeb Ansley for $1,900 and taken a place at the hotel. Zeb had sent her $20 every Christmas for 16 years with nothing written on it, and she had 16 $20 pieces in a sugar tin upstairs at that moment. "So that's what he was at," Delphia said. "He wasn't thinking about you at all that January. He was thinking about me." Etta said that made it worse. "It does," said Delphia. "But listen to me now, because I've had 16 years to work this out, and you've had 11 days. And she said the thing that turned the story. She said that the man from Elko, who was so helpful about the fence, had wanted to stand between her and the county, and that Wilkin, if he had lived, would have stood between her and the county, and that Zeb Ansley had spent 40 minutes and $6 in lawyer's time arranging for a stranger to stand between Etta and the county, and that it was all of it kindness, and every bit of it was the same mistake. Nobody ever took a thing off me, Delphia said. It was given away by 3 different men trying to look after me, and I helped them do it. Don't get stood in front of Etta. That's the whole of it. Get to where they can't do without you, and then it doesn't matter one bit what anybody thinks a woman can hold. Etta Holm rode from Halleck to Elko that same afternoon, 25 miles, and went into the office of the Cottonwood Land and Cattle Company at 4 in the afternoon, and asked for Ives Quarles. Quarles was 39, horse buyer for the Cottonwood, which ran 21,000 cattle out of 3 buckaroo camps between Elko and the Utah line, and he had been trying since April to buy 90 head of broke saddle horses out of a country that had none for sale. He knew exactly who she was, in the sense that he knew there was a woman down at Ansley's who made a nice horse. They signed on the 2nd of August, 1890, 90 head of geldings, 5 to 8 years old. 14 hands 2 inches to 15 hands 1 inch, sound, gentle, broke to the saddle, delivered to the Cottonwood at the stock pens at Halleck Station on or before the 20th of October, 1890, at $65 a head, payable on acceptance. Rejection at the buyer's discretion at the pens. And at the top of it, where the seller goes, it did not say the estate of Zebulon Ansley, and it did not say Holm and Merrick, and it did not say the broke ring. It said Marietta Holm of Smith Creek, Ruby Valley. It was the first piece of paper in 28 years, with her name on it and nobody else's, and she read that line about 40 times on the ride home in the dark. She told Thad Merrick about the contract on the 4th of August at the supper table and put the paper down beside his plate. He read it twice. She watched him get to the seller's line and stop. And for about 4 seconds he was as angry as he ever got, because half those horses were his, and she had bound herself to deliver 90 of them without asking him. And there is not a rancher in Nevada who would not have said something about that. Then he did not say it. What he said after a while was, "Sparrow will tell you that horses can be sold in the ordinary course, and that isn't conveying an interest in the estate. He's right. And the money goes to the note first. So this is legal. I know it is. I asked him on Saturday. And whoever pays the note names the price." Yes, he put the contract down and sat back and looked at the ceiling of a kitchen he owned half of, and Etta Holm sat across from him with her hands flat on the table and waited to be fought. And Thaddeus Merrick said, "Hire me." She said, "What?" "Hire me. $40 a month, which is what he paid you, and I'll take it in cash on the first like anybody else. I'll ride, I'll rope, I'll shoe, I'll haul hay, and I'll do exactly what you tell me from the 5th of August to the 20th of October. I don't want a share of the contract. I don't want my name on it. I don't want to be told thank you in front of anybody." She said, "You understand what that does. If those horses pay that note, I name the price." "Not you." "Yes," he said. "I understand what it does. And there it is. That is the moment, and there is no kiss anywhere near it, and nobody says anything about anybody's eyes." A man who had come down the valley in March, with a draft for $3,000 in his coat and a plan to be generous, sat at a kitchen table in August and asked a woman for wages, and handed her the first move in a game he had every advantage in, and did it with his ears going red, and could not have told you at that moment whether he was in love or simply losing an argument he had stopped wanting to win. She hired him. She wrote it in the tally book, in the same hand and the same ink she used for horses, T. Merrick, hand, $40 the month, from the 5th of August. Then there were 76 days, and they were the best of both their lives, and they were mostly extremely dull. 90 head is a great deal of horse. She had 61 already made that needed only riding out and hardening, and 29 that were 5 and 6 years old and had never had a rope on them past the branding pen, and the 29 were the whole of the problem. Her method took 5 or 6 weeks a horse, and she had 11 weeks and 4 pairs of hands, and no way on earth to hurry. Because the entire value of what she sold was that it did not need hurrying. So they did it 9 at a time, and the days went. Up at 4, 3 horses each before the heat, hay from 10 until 3 because the second cutting was on, 3 more horses in the cool, supper at 8, and Thad Merrick reading out loud badly in the front room until somebody's head went back. On the 19th of August, Loyalstein hired Basilio Aguirre and Tobe Dillaway with an offer of $50 a month and a winter's work, which was $15 over the going rate, and everybody in the valley, including Steen himself, knew exactly what it was for. It was not spite. Steen still thought he was going to marry her in the spring, and he thought a hard autumn would help. They lost 5 days. Etta hired a Shoshone rider named Ned Timmock and a middle-aged man out of Elko named Ferd Alsop, who had come down in the world and was worth 2 of anybody, and they went from 4 pairs of hands to 4 pairs of hands, and Thad Merrick took over the hay entirely and put up 41 tons in 3 weeks by himself with a team and a buckrake, and never mentioned it. The 4th of September is the night everybody in this story remembers afterward, and nothing happens in it. They were out at the Willow with 22 head and a wagon, 14 miles from the house, and a thunderstorm came up the valley from the south at about 7 in the evening and sat on top of them for 3 hours. They got the horses into the wing corral and the wagon sheet over a pole, and they sat under it with their boots in a running inch of water, and it was too loud to talk for the first hour, and then it eased and they talked until 2 in the morning. He told her about his father, about being bought a ranch at 26, and every man on the place knowing, about how he had learned to count things and write everything down and pay on the day, because a man who is exact cannot be laughed at, and how it had taken him 8 years to notice that being exact had not made one single person in Independence Valley believe he had earned anything, and that the only 4 months of his life in which he had not thought about that at all were April, May, June, and July of that year. And she told him about the tin and the $2 on $11, and about being 19 and the worst cook in Elko County, and about carrying the coffee pot the length of the hall at Lamoille in front of 90 people, and how the terrible thing was not that they asked her, it was that she was 3 steps into the kitchen before it occurred to her that anyone might not have. Neither of them touched the other. It was 1890, and they were 2 people who had 68 head of horses to be got ready and a note to pay, and it would not have occurred to either of them. They came in the next morning wet through, and Bessie Aguirre looked at the pair of them across the kitchen and knew the whole thing before they did. They delivered on the 20th of October at the stock pens at Halleck Station, 90 head, in a drive of 2 days from Smith Creek over Secret Pass with 5 riders, and they came into the pens at 11 in the morning, with every horse on his feet and nothing lame. Ives Quarles had 3 camp bosses with him. Now, a camp boss for a big outfit in 1890 is not a fool, and he is not a brute. He is a man with 22 riders and 300 miles of country and 4 months to work it, and what he is afraid of, the thing he lies awake about, is a horse that comes apart 40 miles from anywhere with a green rider on him. And what he has been taught to look for, all his working life, is a horse that has been through it and come out the other side. He wants to see the fight in the horse's history. He can read it in a lip, in an eye, in the way the animal comes to the rope. They put Etta Holm's horses in a round corral and rode 11 of them, one after another, and not one of those horses did a single thing. They stood to be got on. They stood to be got off. They went where they were pointed and stopped when they were asked, and came back to a man walking out to the middle. They were the quietest 11 horses any of the 3 camp bosses had seen in a working corral in their lives, and by the 6th one, the oldest of them, was leaning on the rail, with his arms folded, looking genuinely worried. He said it out loud at the gate, to Quarles, in front of about 20 men and 1 woman. "These aren't broke, Ives. They're just quiet. A horse that ain't bucked ain't broke. He's only not found out yet. Take him out to the antelope camp in November, and the 4th morning one of them will come apart with a rider on him, 40 miles from a shed, and I'll be the man that took him." Quarles walked the pens for 40 minutes with a tally board. He took 51. He took the 51 plainest, oldest, hardest-looking horses in the bunch. The ones with a scar on a hawk or a Roman nose or some visible history, and he passed on 39 of the best animals Etta Holm had ever produced in 9 years of doing it, and he did it for exactly one reason, which is that they were too good in a way he had no way to sell to his own men. He paid $3,315 in a bank draft at the pens at 3 in the afternoon. The note was $4,200 and was due in 12 days. She was $885 short. She did not argue with the camp boss. That is the whole of her, right there at the gate at Halleck, with a draft for $3,315 in her hand and 39 horses behind her that nobody in Nevada wanted. She said to Ives Quarles, "Put them in your camps. All 39 into the 3 camps, tomorrow for 10 days, at no charge whatever. Work them the way you would work a horse you had paid for. On the 1st of November, pay me $65 a head for everyone still in a string, and turn the rest out at my gate, and owe me nothing." Quarles thought about it for about 8 seconds, because it cost him nothing and got him 39 horses free for the tail of the shipping season. He said yes at the gate and had the paper drawn at the hotel that evening, and that evening is the one to keep. They ate at the hotel at Halleck, at the end of Delphia Bray's kitchen table, after the 8 o'clock had gone through, the 2 of them and Delphia. And halfway through it, Thad Merrick put his hand inside his coat and took nothing out of it and put it back, and Etta saw him do it. He had ridden into Halleck that morning with $900 in an inside pocket. He had put it there on the 18th of October, in Elko, in cash, and had ridden 2 days with it against his ribs, because he had known for a month that a rejection at the pens was possible, and had done the arithmetic 3 different ways in the dark. He said, "I have $900 in this coat. I put it there on Saturday. I've had my hand on it 4 times since 3 o'clock. She said nothing at all. "And I'm going to keep it there," he said, "and I want you to know that I had to decide, and that it took me until about an hour ago, and that I am not sure I'd have got there in March." Delphia Bray got up and went to see about the bread. Etta said, "Why not, though?" And Thad Merrick said, "Because on the 2nd of November, somebody in Elko is going to ask how that note got paid, and there are 2 answers. And only one of them is worth anything to you. I'd rather you had the one. It's the only thing I've got that I can give you by not giving it. That is the 3rd time rescue is refused in this story, and it is the only one that costs anybody anything, and it was refused by the man." The 39 went out on the 21st of October to the Antelope Camp, the Boulder Camp, and the camp at Willow Point, 13 head to each. And on the 31st of October, the Cottonwood Land and Cattle Company had 11 cars ordered on the siding at Halleck for 8 in the morning of the 1st of November, and 640 steers gathered on the Antelope Flat, 16 miles out, and at 4 in the afternoon a wet snow came down off the Rubies with a wind behind it and turned the whole of that country into 16 miles of black. You cannot hold cattle in the dark in wet snow with horses that quit. That is not a figure of speech. It is a working fact, and it is the fact the whole of Etta Holm's trade is built on. A horse made in 4 days by 3 men, and a post carries a rider in daylight in a corral perfectly well. At 11 at night, wet, in a wind, 16 miles out. with a rider he does not know asking him to leave the other horses and go out on a wing alone. That horse has one answer, and it is the answer he was taught on the first day, which is that when a person makes you frightened, you get away from the person. They made the pens at 20 minutes to 7 on the morning of the 1st of November, with the whole 6:40 and 40 minutes to spare on the cars. And the antelope camp boss, who was the man who had leaned on the rail 11 days earlier with his arms folded, rode in with his hat gone and ice on his mustache, and got down off a plain bay 6-year-old named Dime, who had spent the last 3 hours of it walking out on a wing in the dark by himself with a stranger on his back, and stood there holding the rein and looked at that horse for a while. Then he went and found Ives Quarles and said, "Buy the whole 39, and ask her what she'd take for the rest of them." Quarles paid $2,535 at the pens at 10 minutes past 8. Etta Holm took the 940 west and was in Elko by 11, and she walked into the Stockman's Bank of Elko with $5,850 of horse money and a canvas apron still on under her coat. And at 20 minutes past 2 in the afternoon on the 1st of November, 1890, the note of Zebulon Ansley, $4,200, given in 1887 against 4,800 acres on Smith Creek, was discharged in full, and the teller wrote paid across the face of it and gave it to her, and she folded it into the tally book with the horses. She paid Thaddeus Merrick $101.33 in wages the same week, and he kept the receipt for the rest of his life, and it is the only document either of them ever framed. On the 4th of November she named the price. She did it in Sparrow's office with the tally book open, and she did not name a number to win with, because the clause did not let you. Under that will, whoever names the figure hands the other one the choice of ends. And there is exactly one figure that is safe to name, which is the true one. So she itemized it out loud for 20 minutes, everything, at what she could actually get. 311 head at what they were worth broke, and what they were worth as they stood. 74 cattle, the ground at what the Grimes place had made an acre in June, the hay, the shop, the shearing shed at nothing, the water, which is not on any inventory anywhere, and is the only thing on the place that cannot be bought or moved, $14,600 the whole, $7,300 the half. Sparrow wrote it out and sent it up the valley by a hired rider, and Thaddeus Merrick had until the 14th to buy it $7,300 or sell at it. Everyone in Elko County knew which. He had the money. She had $650 left out of the contract and $93 in a tin. There were men in the depot saloon taking small bets on the date. He came in on the 14th of November at 11 in the morning, in the same good coat, with Almond Poe and Loyal Steen in the room, because Sparrow had wanted witnesses, and he sat down and took the pen and wrote 4 words on the paper and turned it around. "I elect to sell." Loyal Steen said, out loud, "That's a hard trick," because he thought he had understood it. She could not raise $7. 300 in 10 days if she sold her own boots, and when she failed to complete, she would be the woman who had named a price and could not stand behind it, and the county would have the story for 20 years. Etta Holm did not think that for 1 second, because she had read the will on the 6th of March, and had been living inside it for 8 months, and knew the last line of the clause, the way you know a gate. She said, "Mr. Sparrow, if I don't complete inside the 10 days, what happens?" And Orrin Sparrow, 61 years old, who had drawn wills in Elko County since 1873 and had argued for an hour with Zebulon Ansley in January and lost, said nothing. The price is named, the election is made, and if neither of you completes, the clause is spent, and the will has nothing further to say about either of you. Ever you'd stay exactly as you are. 2 people, 1 ranch, undivided, until one of you does something about it. Thad Merrick said, "That's right." And then he said the only speech he makes in the whole of this year, and it is 5 sentences long, and he says it to a lawyer, and not to her, because he could not have got through it looking at her. That clause had two answers, and both of them end with one name on the deed. I have spent 8 months finding out that one name on that deed is the wrong answer, and it doesn't matter whose. She can't buy me out, and I won't buy her out, so let it run. On the 24th it'll be spent, and the will be finished with us, and then whatever's left is ours. And it'll be the first thing either of us ever had that a piece of paper didn't hand us. I'd like her to have it that way." There was a considerable silence in Orrin Sparrow's office. Etta Holm took her gloves off, which she had not done in that office in March, and put them on the table, and said, "Draw the partnership." Sparrow said he could do it that afternoon. Then he took his spectacles off and polished them, and said that he could also, if it saved anybody a second trip to Elko, do the other thing in 1 page, and that he had done both in the same hour twice in his career, and enjoyed it very much on both occasions. Etta said, "Draw the partnership today. I'll think about the other one on the way home." She thought about it for 11 miles. On the 15th of November, 1890, she rode to Halleck with the branding iron out of the kitchen in a flour sack, and took it into the shop her father had worked in for 14 years, and had the smith heat it and close the gap and dress it, and paid him $4 out of a tin that had held $211 in March. It was registered in Elko County on the 18th, in 2 names, and it was a ring. Ives Quarles's letter came down 3 days later, ordering 60 head at $75 for the spring, and it was addressed to Miss Marietta Holm, Brokering, Smith Creek, and it is the only letter she kept out of all the business she did in the next 30 years, because it was the first one anybody ever wrote to her instead of about her. Delphia Bray came down from Halleck for the wedding in June, and cooked for 40 people, and would not be talked out of it, and spent one of her 16 $20 pieces on a set of curtains, and said, handing them over, that she had been saving them for a use, and this was it. And the fence Zeb Ansley built around Etta Holm went down on the 24th of November, 1890, when nobody completed, and the clause was spent. And she stayed exactly where she was, which is the entire difference between being kept and being chosen, and is the only thing that old man got wrong.